Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Star Wars sequel trilogy. The Star Wars sequel trilogy is the third film trilogy in the Star Wars American space opera franchise created by George Lucas. It is being produced by Lucasfilm and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. The trilogy is to consist of episodes 7 through IX, and chronologically follows Return of the Jedi in the saga. Lucas originally planned a sequel trilogy in the mid-1970s but had abandoned these plans by the late 1990s. The Walt Disney Company acquired Lucasfilm in late 2012, and then announced the production of a sequel trilogy. The first installment, Star Wars: The Force Awakens, was released on December 18, 2015 in the US, following a special premiere screening in Los Angeles on December 14. The film is directed by J.J. Abrams, who co-wrote the screenplay with Lawrence Kasdan and Michael Arndt. Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher and other main cast members from the original trilogy returned to reprise their roles and co-star alongside Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, Adam Driver and Oscar Isaac. Unlike the previous two trilogies, whose films were released approximately 3 years apart, the sequel films are planned to be released 2 years apart. Star Wars: The Last Jedi is set for release on December 15, 2017, with Rian Johnson as screenwriter and director. Episode 9 was to be directed by Colin Trevorrow, however in September 2017. Lucasfilm announced that Trevorrow had departed from the project, and shortly after announced that Abrams would return to direct the film and co-write it with Chris Terrio. The film is scheduled to be released on December 20, 2019. The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens, the first film in the sequel trilogy, takes place approximately 30 years after the events of Return of the Jedi, and includes new characters as well as characters from the original trilogy. In search of Luke Skywalker with the help of Han Solo and Princess Leia, along with Chewbacca, C-3PO, and R2-D2. The Force Awakens, like the subsequent two films, is based on an original screenplay and not a storyline from the expanded universe. The original trilogy's cast joins newcomers Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, Adam Driver and Oscar Isaac. It is directed by J.J. Abrams, who co-wrote a revised version of the screenplay, along with Lawrence Kasdan, co-writer of the screenplays for The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Original drafts of The Force Awakens script were written by Michael Arndt, but ultimately early character and plot elements in Arndt's vision came into conflict with the conceptual ideas of director J.J. Abrams and Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy, as well as filming schedules, and ultimately Arndt was removed from the project due to creative differences and time constraints, being replaced by Kasdan as the primary co-creative visionary to Abrams's plot concepts. George Lucas was set to provide Abrams with advice as a creative consultant, however Lucas had no involvement with the film, with his representative stating Lucas ideally would love not to see any footage until he walks into the theater next December. He has never been able to be surprised by a Star Wars film before, and he said he was looking forward to it. The film began pre-production on October 30, 2012. Production began in April 2014. It was released on December 18, 2015. In the US, the film is rated PG-13 for sci-fi action violence. The second Star Wars film to receive that rating after Revenge of the Sith. The film broke opening weekend box office records in North America with $248 million and totals of $529 million worldwide, the largest opening ever. The film set another new record, by becoming the first movie to break the $1 billion mark in box office sales in just 12 days. It is currently the highest-grossing film of all time in North America, and the third highest-grossing film worldwide unadjusted for inflation. The Last Jedi. On June 20, 2014, Rian Johnson was announced as writer and director of Episode 8, and story treatment writer of Episode 9. Kathleen Kennedy and Ram Bergman were the producers, and J.J. Abrams is the executive producer. Steve Yedlin is the cinematographer. Johnson confirmed in August 2014 that he would direct Episode 8. In March 2015, Oscar Isaac confirmed he would reprise his The Force Awakens role of Poe Dameron in Episode 8. In July 2015, it was reported that Benicio del Toro was being considered for a villain. Del Toro later confirmed that he had been cast. In September 2015, it was reported that Gugu Mbatha-Raw, Tatiana Maslany, Gina Rodriguez, Olivia Cook, and Bel Powley were on the shortlist for two separate parts. Jimmy V was cast as R2-D2, succeeding Kenny Baker, who died in August 2016. Much of the filming for Episode 8 took place at Pinewood Studios near London. In September 2015, some pre-production filming took place on the island of Skellig Michael Island to take advantage of better weather conditions. In a November 2015 interview with Wired, Abrams stated that the film's script was completed. In December 2015, Hamill, Isaac Christie, and Boyega were confirmed to reprise their roles as Luke Skywalker, Poe Dameron, Captain Phasma, and Finn respectively. Kennedy announced on December 17, 2015 at the London premiere for The Force Awakens that most of the cast would return for Episode 8. On January 20, 2016, Lucasfilm and Disney announced that the release of the film would be delayed to December 15, 2017. Principal photography began in February 2016. Additional filming took place in Dubrovnik from March 9 to March 16, 2016, as well as in Ireland. Principal photography wrapped in July 2016. On December 27, 2016, Carrie Fisher died after going into cardiac arrest a few days earlier. Fisher had completed filming her role as General Leia Organa before her death. On January 23, 2017, the film was given a confirmed release date of December 15, 2017. With the title Star Wars: The Last Jedi, Episode 9. In June 2014, Johnson was announced as writing a story treatment for Episode 9, though by April 2017 he stated he would not be involved with writing the film. In August 2015, Colin Trevorrow was announced as the director of Episode 9. Trevorrow, along with Derek Connolly, began writing the script. On February 10, 2016, Disney Chief Executive Officer Bob Iger confirmed that pre-production of Episode 9 had begun. Cinematographer John Schwartzman is planning on using 65mm film. In late December 2016, media outlets reported that Carrie Fisher was slated for a key role in Episode 9. In January 2017, Lucasfilm stated they would not digitally generate Fisher's performance for the film. In April 2017, it was confirmed by Kathleen Kennedy that Fisher will not be in Episode 9. In August 2017, it was announced that Jack Thorne would rewrite the script. On September 5, 2017, Lucasfilm announced that Trevorrow had stepped down as director of the film. A week later, it was announced that Abrams would return to direct Episode 9. Abrams will also co-write the film with Chris Terrio in addition to producing the film through his company Bad Robot Productions, with Kennedy and Michelle Ridgwin. Principal photography is set to begin in June 2018. The film is scheduled to be released on December 20, 2019, replacing the original May 2019 date. Initial development. Mark Hamill has stated that Lucas told him in 1976 while filming the first film in Tunisia that 3 Star Wars trilogies were planned. Lucas suggested Hamill could have a cameo role in Episode 9, which he imagined filming by 2011. A Time magazine story in March 1978, quoting Lucas, also contained the assertion there would be 10 further Star Wars films after The Empire Strikes Back. Gary Kurtz was also aware of proposed story elements for Episode 7 to Episode 9 before 1980. In 1980, at the time of the release of The Empire Strikes Back, Lucas said there were 7 further Star Wars films he wanted to make. He said he had 12-page outlines for those films. In an interview with Jim Steranko in Preview magazine published in late 1980, Lucas described how the expansive scope of Star Wars had started with an overlong screenplay. He then added that he had, in this interview, Lucas also stated that he had titles and 10-page story outlines for each of the 9 episodes. In an interview with Gary Kurtz in the same magazine, Kurtz said, in an interview with Starlog magazine published in September 1981, Lucas confirmed that he had the 9-film series plotted, cautioning cancellation and Disney acquisition. From 1997 to mid-2012, Lucas frequently stated that he had no plans to make the sequel trilogy, and said he would not allow others to do so either. He gave various explanations for the apparent abandonment of plans to film the sequel trilogy. In August 1999, at a press conference in New York City to discuss The Phantom Menace, Lucas described the 9-year commitment required to make a Star Wars trilogy. In 2002, he said, "Basically what I said as a joke was, maybe when Harrison and Carrie are in their 70s, we'll come back and do another version." The thing I didn't realize then, and that I do realize now very clearly, is that not only would they be in their 70s, but I would be in my 70s too. In 2007, Lucas described making the films at that age as an idea that seemed amusing at the time but doesn't seem realistic now, and suggested that, off-the-cuff, comments he had made in earlier years had been misconstrued as absolute statements. At a 1997 special edition press conference, Lucas said, "Everyone said, well, are you going to do sequels to the first 3, but that was an afterthought. I don't have scripts on those stories. The only notion on that was, wouldn't it be fun to get all the actors to come back when they're 60 or 70 years old, and make 3 more about them as old people." In a 1997 issue of Star Wars Insider, he said, "The whole story has 6 episodes. If I ever went beyond that, it would be something that was made up. I really don't have any notion other than, gee, it would be interesting to do Luke Skywalker later on. It wouldn't be part of the main story, but a sequel to this thing." In an interview published in the February 1999 issue of Vanity Fair, Lucas said, "When you see it in 6 parts you'll understand. It really ends at part 6. I never had a story for the sequels for the later ones." In 2008, after all 6 films had been released, Lucas said, "The movies were the story of Anakin Skywalker and Luke Skywalker, and when Luke saves the galaxy and redeems his father, that's where that story ends." In 1999, when asked about the possibility of someone else making Star Wars films, Lucas said, "Probably not. It's my thing." In a 2008 interview in Total Film, Lucas ruled out anybody else making Star Wars films. Asked if he was happy for new Star Wars films to be made after his death, he said, "I've left pretty explicit instructions for there not to be any more features." There will definitely be no Episode 7 IX. That's because there isn't any story. I mean, I never thought of anything. And now there have been novels about the events after Episode 6, which isn't at all what I would have done with it. The Star Wars story is really the tragedy of Darth Vader. That is the story. Once Vader dies, he doesn't come back to life, the Emperor doesn't get cloned, and Luke doesn't get married. However, speaking after Disney's 2012 acquisition of Lucasfilm, Lucas said, "I always said I wasn't going to do any more, and that's true because I'm not going to do any more. But that doesn't mean I'm unwilling to turn it over to Kathy to do more." However, in 2015, Lucas said he planned to finish Episode 7, release it in May 2015, and then sell the company afterward. But Disney expressed interest with Lucas, saying, "It's better for me to get out at the beginning of a new thing and I can just remove myself. The time is more important to me than the money." Story development. Lucas had story treatments for Episodes 7, 8 and IX, which he turned over to Disney chairman Bob Iger around the time Lucasfilm was sold to Disney in 2012. However, during an interview with Cinema Blend in January 2014, to promote the upcoming release of the Lucasfilm animated movie Strange Magic, Lucas revealed that ultimately Disney chose not to use the story treatments which he had written and turned over with the acquisition, and that the company chose to create brand new stories for the upcoming movies instead, the ones that I sold to Disney. They came up to the decision that they didn't really want to do those, so they made up their own. So it's not the ones that I originally wrote on screen in Star Wars: The Force Awakens. No information about these has been released. However, during the previous 35 years, Lucas had given many hints about the content of the sequel trilogy, including the following possibilities. Interviewed in 2012 after the announcement of the new trilogy, Lucas biographer Dale Pollock said that he had in the 1980s read the outlines to 12 Star Wars episodes planned by Lucas, but had been required to sign a confidentiality agreement. Pollock said, author Timothy Zahn, whose Star Wars novel series The Thrawn Trilogy is set in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, was also interviewed in 2012. Zahn confirmed the sequel trilogy would not be based on the Thrawn novels, but said he had been briefed years before on Lucas' plans for the sequels. As announced by Lucasfilm, the new trilogy also meant the end of most of the existing Star Wars Expanded Universe, so as to give maximum creative freedom to the filmmakers and also preserve an element of surprise and discovery for the audience. Much of the old content would continue to be available under the Star Wars Legends brand. Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Would you like to know more?